And I even pinned myself under the bar one time, maxing out on the bench press. I'm sure a couple of people are cringing. In about 7th grade. And fortunately, the little set I had bought at a garage sale, didn't come with collars. So I flipped to one side, dumped the plates off, and of course it jerked me all the way back the other way. I ended up on the floor on top of the bar, and the bench was on top of me. So, needless to say, I've tried a lot of different approaches over the years. I've made a lot of training mistakes, and I'm probably still making a lot of training mistakes. So, I'm very comfortable with my speech topic today because I've made just about every mistake you can make. And that's what I'm going to talk about, common training mistakes. It's easy to make a lot of mistakes with all the lousy advice floating around. If you pick up a newsstand magazine, you're probably headed down the wrong track immediately. So I can sympathize with people who do things probably that they shouldn't be doing. I decided to focus today on mistakes people make, not in exercise form, because that's kind of like a whole speech topic to itself. Instead, I'm going to talk more about general mistakes people make concerning their whole approach to training. I have a basic theme I'd like to leave you with today, and that's, when in doubt, start with the middle-of-the-road approach. And the best way to do this is you kind of got to first identify extreme positions. It'll be over here on one side and over here, and if you can converge in the middle somewhere, that's a good starting point at least. From this starting point, your experience and the things, the conferences you go to, the things you pick up along the way, will allow you to adjust, maybe away from this middle position toward whatever works best for you. A simple example maybe for a beginning trainee, if you read anything about rep ranges on your exercises, you hear so many different opinions, everything from, hey, I only do singles, I do about 15 to 20 sets of one rep, to the other end of the spectrum, one set's the way to go, 20 reps and you're out of here, go to the next exercise. So, for the beginning trainee, I would recommend not starting really at either of those points. Just start somewhere in the middle. Do a couple sets of 10, see how that goes for a few months. After breaking in and learning a little bit about your body, then you can begin to experiment with other approaches. That's just one example of what I mean by the middle-of-the-road approach. I don't want anybody to get too hung up on a specific rep range because I really don't care about it that much. Throughout the rest of my talk, though, I'll try to kind of point out a few of these extremes when discussing various training mistakes I've made and seen. Now, extremes aren't always bad. I want to make that clear. I just don't think it's a good idea to start with an extreme position. You should kind of evolve to that point through your training or your coaching experience. I'm going to move on now and begin discussing some of the most common training mistakes. The first area I'll touch on is workout structure. By this I mean how often you train, what exercises you include, things like that. The biggest mistake I see here is training too frequently. Why do I say this? Because you see 4, 5, and 6 day per week training programs promoted heavily in the newsstand magazines, and that's what kids do in gyms. Let's touch on the extremes. Again, at one end, you see split routines, maybe that call for training as frequently as 6 days a week, sometimes even as often as twice a day, so that you hit every little muscle from every little angle. Not that it's a bad thing to hit different little muscles, but to train twice a day, 6 days a week, I would think would be a little bit excessive. Of course, they justify this by saying the Russians and Bulgarians do it. At the other end of the spectrum, I've actually seen a few articles that call for training certain areas of the body, the low back, for example, which can be susceptible to injury, as infrequently as once per month. What's the solution? Well, first thing I would say is don't divide the body up into so many different parts. Aside from the fact that I believe the body works better as a coordinated unit, these approaches are confusing as hell. And training should not be rocket science. Try to think more in terms of training certain lifts than in training certain body parts. If you do this, I think you'll have no trouble getting down to 2 or 3 workouts a week as a good middle-of-the-road approach. And in fact, an earlier speaker kind of laid that out for you. A second big mistake in the area of workout structure is trying to include too many exercises. This one flows directly from training too frequently. If you're training 6 days a week, it's a lot easier to start cluttering up your program with a bunch of useless exercises. Obviously, unless you're a Superman, you're not going to squat all 6 of those days, so you start throwing things in. I'm not going to get into great detail here, but I will provide some general thoughts. Exercises that involve a lot of your body's muscle mass are best. These include squats, deadlifts, cleans, presses, stuff like that. One problem in today's society is people believe anything basic can't work. They think it's got to be a computerized mass of chrome and pulleys in order to hold their attention for even a few minutes. Isolation exercises do serve a purpose, but I believe they're best for injury prevention and rehab. An example from my training is rear delt work. After hearing the last speaker, I realized I'm probably not doing my rear delt work right, but I do include some rear delt work. I don't know if there's a real good scientific basis to it or not, but it does seem to help me prevent injury when I bench heavy. This approach to exercise selection is a good starting point. Start with the basics. A third mistake with regard to workout structure is performing too many sets and reps. Here we're getting into the scientific stuff, which really kind of loses me. People talk about calculating things like weekly training volume, and I start to get a headache. I prefer to think in terms of limiting my time in the gym. Then I have no choice but to limit my number of sets, or I won't finish my workout. I won't tell you how many sets to do for a single exercise, or for a workout, or in a week, because too many people out there have had too many good results from different approaches. So it'd be ludicrous for me to act like I have a definitive answer there. This kind of brings me to the final mistake I want to discuss in the area of workout structure, and that's intensity. The 3 mistakes I've talked about to this point, training too frequently, using too many exercises, performing too many sets, they all lead to the issue of intensity. Many people simply do not train with enough intensity to get very good gains. Why not? Because they can't. They train too often. They try to fit in every exercise from the Mr. So-and-so encyclopedia of training. And they insist on doing 15 sets per body part. They're simply too worn out to train hard. It's kind of like the law of diminishing returns that is studied and slept through in business school. To a point, you can condition your body to do more work. In other words, you can get in shape. At some threshold, however, more work will not produce more gains. In fact, it may actually detract from gains. I'd like to add one more mistake in the area of workout structure that kind of occurred to me when I heard one of the earlier speakers talking, and I believe it was touched on. And that's working on the exercises that you like and happen to be good at. This is a big mistake. Now, not that it's entirely bad to maximize your ability on things you're good at. I think you should. If you happen to be a good squatter, by all means, squat as much as you can. Still, you have to do other things. Why? So you don't have an underdeveloped third head of the tricep? No. So you don't develop a weak link and hurt yourself. Example, if you have a weak lower back, don't avoid training it. And be sure and work your abs also. You have to be smart about it, and you must gradually and progressively strengthen the weak area. That's about all I'm going to say in regard to workout structure. If anyone has any questions on kind of the first little segment, I'd be happy to take them now, or I can take them at the end. Any questions? Okay. Everything we talked about so far has kind of covered the nuts and bolts of training. How often, how many sets, what exercises. Often, though, training mistakes aren't really about the nuts and bolts of training. They're kind of more about a person's whole concept of training and what they hope to get out of it. The whole drug scene certainly adds to the frustration. There is no doubt that drugs and genetics allow many people to break the common sense rules of training and get away with it, at least for a while. Consequently, guys who don't use drugs are often bewildered by their lack of progress while following the same routines as the druggies. Amazingly, however, many people fail to realize this and continue to compare themselves to the drug-loaded guys in the magazines. And most of these people end up either quitting training altogether or maybe even experimenting with drugs. So what I want to talk about now is the mindset required to avoid this trap and persevere with your training. Lifting weights is hard work. We've seen some guys struggle pretty good today. Some of them weren't even using any weights. It sometimes takes quite a while to see good results, particularly if you progress beyond the beginner stage. Thus, one of the big mental mistakes I see is lack of patience. Probably because training is demanding, a certain mystique has developed surrounding it. Guys search for the one perfect routine, the perfect exercise, or the perfect supplement that will unlock all these magical gains. In an endless quest, they change programs with every new issue of Muscle and Fiction. If I can say that. Now, I'm not saying that variety is bad or that new approaches should all be dismissed. Remember my opening comments about the middle-of-the-road approach. So what are the extremes? On the one hand are those pathetic souls whose complete lack of confidence in their own judgment prevents them from ever settling on anything. So they jump around from program to program forever. Equally as depressing, however, are those who really believe there's only one productive way to train. They cling to their approach so fiercely that they alienate themselves and miss many opportunities to learn. The middle-of-the-road solution lies with patience. It's all right to make changes to your program, but then stick with them for a while. For me, about 3 or 4 months is the minimum time period required to evaluate a change in my program. In addition, I keep accurate records of my training so I can evaluate each change objectively. Over time, this approach has allowed me to choose training methods that work best for me. Related to this lack of patience is another mental mistake I was guilty of during my first couple years of training. I touched on this one when addressing the steroid issue. It is unrealistic expectations. When I began training, I was bombarded with ridiculous claims of enormous gains in just a few weeks. I expected to look like Hawk and run over everyone on the football field in short order. When this didn't happen overnight, and as you can see it never did, I found out about drugs and went on to the other extreme with my thinking. Not only did I no longer expect overnight gains, I didn't expect any gains. I began to assume that the only people who could really benefit from weight training were those who were using drugs. Thankfully, I didn't quit training altogether. Instead, I settled into a sad little sort of fitness routine for a while. Occasionally, I'd try to add weight to the bar, but it didn't last for very long. Eventually, though, I stumbled across 1 or 2 sensible training articles in one of the magazines. I did a bit of research, started an abbreviated program of basic exercises, and made diligent effort to add weight to the bar. While I never did look like a bodybuilder, I did add a lot of size and strength and had a lot of fun doing it. If you're new to training, you need to take a hard look at what you expect to get out of it. If you're a coach, you need to instill realistic expectations in your athletes. If not, you'll have a hard time getting them to stick to any program for very long and to give it a very good effort. How do you develop realistic expectations? By setting realistic goals. Though many people make the biggest mistake of all when they don't set goals. What are realistic goals? They're measurable. Gain 10 pounds of body weight. Add 20 pounds to my top set of 5 squats. They have both short and long-term components. Increase my bench from 200 to 205 this month. And use the same form, obviously, for both testing periods. Increase it to 240 in a year. Again, without bouncing the bar off my stomach and cheating. Finally, goals are based on current achievement. A 200-pound squatter shouldn't even be thinking about 500. That's unrealistic at this stage. He should concentrate on steadily moving toward 300. Unfortunately, many people worry about everything but progression and goals. They worry about rest intervals, training volume, a lot of that stuff we were talking about earlier, number of sets, and anything else that will let them avoid goal setting and committing to achieving goals. Don't be one of these people. If you're a coach, set goals for every one of your athletes and make them specific to that athlete's current ability. If you train yourself, don't avoid goal setting. At the same time, enjoy the process of training. I'm here today because I love to lift and I want to learn as much as I can to improve my lifting. I plan on doing this for the rest of my life. While you have a goal and you know you need to add weight to the bar, you may not be able to do so every single workout. In fact, you won't. You have to listen to your body so that you don't add weight too fast, compromise your form, and end up being injured all the time. I'm not a big fan of cycling because I think many people cycle back too far and spend too much time training with weights that don't push them to get stronger. Still, you have to adjust to your natural ups and downs. I set goals and I work to achieve them, but I try not to become so obsessed that I can't enjoy the process of training. Again, I believe I've taken a middle-of-the-road approach. I hope that doesn't sound like a cop-out, but it works for me. Finally, be careful where you get your training advice. I've offered a few ideas, and so have the other speakers. You probably don't agree with all of it, but you can probably uncover some useful information in just about anything that's said. If you plan on staying in the iron game, you'll need to get pretty good at this skill. There's a lot of bull to sift through. There are good sources of advice and information out there. You just have to try and find them and stick to them. So, my final mistake would be don't take all your training advice from the biggest guy in the gym or in your town or wherever. He might have something good to say, but then again, he might not. Often it seems like the biggest guy around succeeds in spite of himself. At the same time, I wouldn't recommend listening only to academic types. I've seen a few of them who don't know the difference between a power clean and a reverse curl. The best sources of advice for me are those who have an actual training background and who also know something about the way the human body works. That's about all I have to say. I'll wrap it up here in just a second and take any questions you might have. Let me just say that I think there are 3 keys to avoiding the mistakes I've laid out today. Number 1, keep your program simple. Second, work very hard but infrequently. And finally, set goals and patiently but diligently work toward achieving them. You don't have forever to train, but you do have plenty of time. Throughout your training life, you'll probably try many different training approaches, and experience will be your best teacher in determining what works best for you. Thanks for your time. If anyone has any questions, I'll take them. Yeah?
Yeah, what do you think about machine versus crewing?
You know, I don't really have any opinion. I've used both in my training, and I've used both effectively. I haven't had the opportunity to use the true squat, but we have a hammer leg press at the gym where I work out, and particularly if I'm trying to squat and deadlift heavily, sometimes I can't do both in the same week. So, in fact, a lot of times I can't. For a long time, I would squat, say, on Monday and deadlift on Friday, put a bench workout in the middle, kind of like a typical powerlifting routine. That worked pretty good, but as the weights climbed heavier, I'd squat and I wouldn't be ready to deadlift. So I now actually do squats and deadlifts on the same day, but to give my back a little more time to rest. The squat workout will be heavy one week, and then I'll pull from the knees in the rack or something for the deadlifts to give my back a little break, or I'll do some shrugs or something, some type of deadlift movement. On the next week, I'll deadlift competition style, but maybe I'll use a machine, maybe I'll use a leg press or something to work my legs. So, I mean, I think you can get good results any way you go as long as you work hard. Anybody else? Yeah.
You ever use the trap bar?
Yeah, sure. I like that. I like it. In some ways, I think it's a little bit more similar to a squat rather than a deadlift, but you do get a lot of upper back out of it.
When you use them, would you substitute the squat, or would you consider it a deadlift? We're going to use it as an alternative.
I tried it both ways, and I don't think it really matters that much. Yeah, I fiddle around with those little nuances all the time. And,